So for everyone who is watching this now, who tried to watch it on Facebook Live, we had technical difficulties. Welcome to the first of our panel discussions for Don't Turn Out the Lights, the official tribute to Alvin Schwartz's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And I'm here with 5 of the writers from the book, and they're going to introduce themselves, and we'll talk about this book, about scary stories, about writing scary stories of all kinds, and a little bit of this and that. So, Margie, you're up.
Hi, I'm Margaret Stohl, and hi guys. My short story in this collection is called "Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board," based on my childhood favorite game at my slumber party, Discuss. I write a bunch of comics for Marvel. And Cami, who's also on this panel, and I wrote Beautiful Creatures together, which is a Southern Gothic series most people know us from, among other books.
Cool. All right, Brendan.
Hi, my name is Brendan Reichs. I am an author as well. I wrote a story in the collection called The Carved Bear, and it was just sort of creepy. Actually, I don't know if I was the only one that made the choice, but I decided to set it in a little bit of olden time, if you will, and I just had a lot of fun with it. I don't know, it just came to me fully formed. I've written a couple other things. I wrote the Project Nemesis series, which is Nemesis, Genesis, and Chrysalis. I wrote a series called Virals a while ago, and a middle grade series with Alethea Kontis called The Dark Deep. Which has a 3rd book coming out, plug, this October. So nice to see everyone.
Cool. Alethea?
Hi, I'm Alethea Kontis. My story in the book is called The Golden Peacock, that is actually based on a painting that creeped me out when I was a small child. So, pulling from real life. In addition to being an author, I'm also a storm chaser, a Saturday songwriter. We just had an album come out with Snow Patrol, which is kind of amazing. I contribute regularly to NPR. I just had a piece come out today, and I also narrate stories for Clark's World and the Escape Artist podcast. I had one come out in Pseudopod called Dive in Me that is really creepy and fun.
Cool. Josh?
Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Malerman. I'm the author of Bird Box and Mallory. Mallory is the newest one. I also wrote The Cries of the Cat in this book we're talking about today, which has a real of an ending. And I read everyone else's story that is on this panel, and they're all freaking awesome, and I'm excited to talk about all this. So, and I live in Michigan, I just felt like saying that. And I also wish I was a storm chaser, so I would like to hear more about that later.
Yeah,
and,
you're cooler than we are.
Yeah.
And Cami?
Hi, I'm Cami Garcia, and I wrote with Margaret Stohl the Beautiful Creatures and the Dangerous Creatures series. And now I wrote some other stuff too. I wrote a companion book, The X-Files Origins, Agent of Chaos, which Jonathan wrote the other one, Devil's Advocate. So if you put them together, they make like a Mulder and Scully teen story. And I am doing comics now. My YA series is called Teen Titans, and I did Raven last year. And actually the same day this anthology comes out, Tuesday, is Teen Titans Beast Boy. So it's the first time I've had like lots of things to promote all at the same time. So it's kind of exciting.
Nice.
Did you write a story in this collection, Cami?
Oh, yes. And my story in this collection is called The Bottle Tree, which is also Southern Gothic. And
Reminded me.
yeah, and it's based on, it's kind of an elaboration of a story. A lot of my family members have bottle trees. So I kind of made an expanded story about like why they used to tell me we need a bottle tree.
Cool. And I'm Jonathan Maberry. I'm a author in multiple genres. I write for kids, adults. I write comics for Marvel, IDW, Dark Horse, and DC. And I had a TV show called TV show called V-Wars on Netflix early this year. And a couple other fun projects in development for film. And I'm the editor of this book. And so I'm going to start off real quickly talking about just a little bit about how this thing got started. And then I want to ask each writer a little bit about their history with the whole Scary Stories world. So the Horror Writers Association is exactly what it sounds, the International Association of Horror Writers. And I had done a previous teen anthology, YA anthology called Scary Out There for them. And we wanted to do something a little different. And we all loved scary stories. Some of us, like myself, got to the stories much later because they were published when I was already an adult. Some of the contributors grew up with those stories. Some remember telling those stories to their kids, or a combination of all those things. And we thought how wonderful it would be to bring new voices to that, since Alvin, of course, has passed. And so they asked me if I would want to edit it, which was one of the silliest questions I've ever been asked. Like, what other possible answer is there but yes, And they also gave me the opportunity of curating it, which was great. So of the 35 contributors, about 28 are handpicked from writers whose work that I'm really familiar with, whose personalities I know well enough to know that they play well with others, and who have an inventive storytelling voice that not only would honor the original source material, but bring something new to it as well. Not just bringing it into the 21st century, but giving it an opportunity to reach kids of all ages. And I think we accomplished that pretty nicely. The other contributors in this were an open call within the Horror Writers Association. And we were hoping to get, I don't know, a couple of dozen submissions. We got an avalanche of submissions, and we got an avalanche of really great submissions. And it got, one of the hard parts about being an editor is when you have an open call and you only have X number of slots and you have more stories than you have slots. That's a heartbreaker. So we are hoping at some point to have a second volume of this if things go well. And some of those stories that we weren't able to use the first time, hopefully we'll use in the next. So I want to kind of go around with the crowd here and ask, when did the original scary stories to tell in the dark, when did they come onto your personal radar? So we'll start with Cammie and work backward up the list here. Cammie?
I read them. I started reading horror kind of late. I read Stephen King's kind of more supernatural-esque stuff first, and then I got to horror. But I also, when I really, really got into them was I taught third grade and second grade for years, and they were so popular in my classroom. I worked in underserved schools, and some of my students were struggling readers. And so I would always try to find really fun things to read out loud or for them to read. And they loved them. Like, I would read them out loud. I remember I had to buy a whole bunch of copies because they got like threadbare because they were so popular. So I love the idea of writing for the anthology because I know how much kids love this type of story and the original.
Cool. Josh?
Well, I mean, I am a child of the 80s for sure, and what a horror decade to be raised, right? And so it seems like, honestly, it's as far back as I can remember, the original book has been in every house I've lived in. And I looked the book up before this panel. I didn't realize it's like 7 million copies sold, all this stuff. I just didn't quite realize the scope of this. And I think it's interesting because it's really like, if you told me this was written in the 40s, I would have been like, oh, okay, 50s, all right, like 60s, 70s, 80s. It doesn't smack of the 80s like a lot of 80s stuff does. It wasn't presented that way. The illustrations weren't of that like aesthetic. It had its own look, feel. These were for kids, but they were scary to us. And I remember in the house I grew up in, the book was, back then the illustrations scared me more than the stories,
Yeah,
and then,
Stephen Gammell's stuff is incredible.
Unbelievable. I have the blasphemous version, the other illustrated one. But no, I know. But I do. I mean, but I feel bad for this dude. This poor guy did an awesome job, and everything. Anyway, but I remember around like 2005, I was living with this girl I was dating, and all of a sudden one day the first volume just popped up in the bathroom, and I'm like, where'd this come from? And she's like, it was yours. I'm like, no, I don't have this book. And then she's like, I think it's in your stuff. But even like through my whole life, it seems to have followed me around. So yeah, that's my relationship. It's a pretty good one.
Cool. Alethea.
Much like Josh, I grew up with this book. It was ubiquitous. It was in the Scholastic Book Flyer. It was in every library I ever visited, but I didn't read it until I was older because when I was a young person, scary stories scared me. I scared myself my nightmares were the things of nightmares. They were awful, and I had a horrible overactive imagination. And so, yeah, I didn't actually read them until I was in college, actually making horror movies with my friends. Because once you make them and you're on the other side of the camera, the veil is sort of pulled away and you can see the humor and the falseness. I took everything to heart. These were awful people hurting other people. No. So when I was in college, I started to read these stories because they were everywhere, and Stephen King and all the other things finally opened my world to the world of scariness because it was okay. I was old enough.
Nice. Brendan.
Yeah, so these were the forbidden books. So I remember they would show up at our book fair, but they were on a special table and you had to go around the corner to see them because they were scary cover. The art was considered mature for our elementary school. And so like under 3rd grade or something, I don't even think you were allowed to purchase them with your book fair money. So they of course were the most popular item imaginable. I mean, they were forbidden. They were like literally hidden around the corner. And so I knew my sister had them. I have a sister who's about 2.5 years, 2 grade levels older than me. And so she got them. And so of course, you know, everybody was trying to get their hands on the book. We're not even allowed to look at. And I read them and they were terrifying. I mean, I remember these stories were like, they were so good. They were like stories I already knew when I was reading them for the first time. And that's kind of what I thought was the most amazing thing about the collection. And so I used to have every birthday, for me, I had an outdoor camping party because my dad had this giant, enormous house tent thing. And we put it up in the backyard. And I love Margie's story because we would play, you know, games like light as a feather, stiff as a board. And we'd be out in the back. And this book would always show up and everyone would be terrified by it. And we'd all end up sleeping in the living room by, you know, 11. That's just how it goes when you're in a elementary school outdoor backyard birthday parties. And so this book was like iconic to me. It was like a little bit of like a maturity level gained when you were allowed to read it. And so I absolutely devoured them when I could. And yeah, they followed me. I had nightmares. So, you know, buyer beware, but they were the best kind of scary you could have.
Nice. Margie.
I have strong memories of sort of the urban legend, the urban myths that some of these, my favorite of these stories reflected. So I grew up with the, like, you know, all the lore of don't look in the mirror, Bloody Mary will look at you, the girl who unties the ribbon and her head falls off, or all the, you know, like there was so much, in the 70s and 80s both, there was so much sort of ingrained lore there. So I felt like it was a really authentic, it was a kind of authentic scare that I grew up with that seemed really like to come from the world I lived in or the stories we told. And so I found that to be terrifying in a kind of what you're saying, Brendan, like it just seemed really real to me because it was so real to the sort of imagination of the people I hung out with and the world my childhood. Kind of also in like a Stranger Things way where there's like a zeitgeist and you really all feel it together and you all, the same things are scaring you all. And this was part of that for me. And I don't know, like in the age of modern, you know, like we weren't all on TikTok, you know, at my 6th grade summer party, we were literally playing light as a feather, stiff as a board. And I don't know what it's like now, you know, what the, you know, like if there is that kind of sort of fictionalization, you know, of your scare world in the same way, because maybe you're just online. I have no idea.
It'd be kind of sad to think there's a light as a feather, stiff as a board app that they
Right?
play instead, you know.
That's wrong.
Yeah, that would definitely wrong. My introduction to it is actually in the introduction to the book, so people can read that when they read the book. So when I reached out to you, Cats, and asked, you know, if you'd be interested in writing stories, one of the weird things is nobody said no.
Yeah.
But why did you say yes? So I want to go back the other direction, start with Margie. Why did you say yes?
Well, it was interesting because I generally hate short stories. I mean, I hate writing them. I'm terrible at it. You may have picked up on that. It's painful for me. I write long, as Cami will tell you. And I don't have the sort of sharp, you know, one pivot is not so natural to me of like the short story, sort of about a moment that you unfold. So I generally try to never do this, but but this was so iconic to me that I could not do it. So it was like it was a trap. I got trapped into it, and then I had to thrash around, and it was painful. But it was like a good experience for me because I wanted to do it out of respect, I guess, for the original material.
Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, I really would almost give the same answer. Like, I actually have avoided anthologies for most of my career because I didn't know that I really had like a story to contribute to most of them. So most of them I would just be like, I don't know if I'm just sort of freewheeling, but this was not one that I was going to miss. Like, I wanted to be in this anthology, which I don't want to put them short story collections down because I think they're great. Just a lot of them I think are a little contrived, and a lot of them are people like, you want a collection of authors, but they didn't actually have a bunch of stories sitting around. They're just like, oh, let's all try and write something. Where this one was just like, no, I read these as a kid. I want to be in the new ones. That would be, to me, for me personally in my career, a point of pride to say that like I was in that collection when we sort of paid homage to those stories. And so it was an auto yes for me. There was no chance that I wasn't going to try and put something good. And I actually put a lot of pressure on myself to write something that was good for this because I, wanted it to be a scary story. And I think the two hardest things to really write are scary and funny, like on command. You can get there and you can do it, but it's very hard to do just like, give me something scary, give me something funny, and give it to me in a short version. That's a lot of pressure. So I was sort of said yes, and then kind of sat there like, oh boy, don't screw this up. So hopefully it came through. I felt like the story came together pretty well once I thought of it, but that was why I just absolutely wasn't going to miss.
Cool. Alethea?
No, just wasn't an option. It just wasn't an option. Probably for me, mostly because so many people know me as fairy tale alphabet girl, and everybody forgets that I started in horror. And so this was, I mean, like Brendan said, the perfect, check this box, level up, absolutely. But also to remind people that, oh, that's right, Alethea has a dark side. We forget.
Josh?
Well, number one, working with you. This is, I think, the third time, and I was in Scary Out There, which you mentioned before. And
four, Weird Tales, I think.
Oh yeah, 4 Weird Tales. So yeah, so I was like, I mean, just start there. Anything you sent, I'd be like, oh, let's roll, let's do it. The thing that is so exciting to me though is it's almost like in a bizarre way, the scary stories are scarier than, what would be an adult's, even like a brutal or realistic novel. And I don't exactly know why. And I know that often we'll say that, little kids in books and movies are scary, but often for me, it's the stories that are for little kids are scary to me. And I've never tried my hand at something like that. And I think I've always sort of, what's the right phrase for that? Like never saw myself that way. Like, oh yeah, I don't know if I could do something like that. But I am someone who values trying different voices in different novels and trying radically different, almost to the point where it might feel like a different author wrote the book following the last one. So to me, this was kind of like also, all right, you never saw yourself this way. Jonathan's opening his door for you. Do this and try this. So that, yeah. So it was like a challenge. And like you just said, the idea, like I also said to myself, I was like, I'm going to do this, but this got to be actually scary. It's like, we got to live up to this. We can't just goof around, right? Yeah. I felt the same way.
Cool. Cami?
Well, like Josh, you are one of the 2 people who can talk me and Jonathan to doing almost anything. So as in the past, when you have invited me to other things, I always end up saying yes. This one was an auto yes for the same reason though. Like I handed these books out to my students. I remember the book in my library at elementary school. So to me, what?
You handed them out to my child.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, it was like like Brendan said, an honor to be in something that I remember. And also, as Josh mentioned, I do feel like they have a very timeless quality. All the stories it doesn't date itself. Like, I feel like, I could give kids the book. None of them knew it was from the 80s. Some of them thought it was brand new. And I loved the feel that participating in something that could be around for a long time. The thing that intimidated me is, like Josh, I don't usually write middle grade. And I know middle grade is hard because I taught that age and I've read so many middle grade books. And, you know, it's a really specific voice that you have to nail. And also, I feel like there's a balance of how, you know, how scary you are. And again, like how kind of how much is physical horror versus psychological horror. So for me, the biggest thing I was scared of was like, am I going to do a super lame job of this? Because when I was trying to come up with ideas, I love writing short stories, but I kept thinking like that could go too dark. But then I also didn't want to write something that like kids were like, this is Cami Garcia wrote the lamest scary story in the whole book. And it's not even scary. So I had to like play around for a while to feel like I got the, you know, kind of the age right.
But Brendan, who's the like middle grade, you know, author, has by far the scariest story of this group, which I find kind of fascinating.
Also, like the goriest, or it has the goriest.
Like the most hurting children, which I found fascinating.
Yeah.
So I was so worried about that.
It was interesting. I was actually going to open the book with the carved bear, but was talked out of it by some folks involved in this because we didn't want to, you know, because it's a short story. It can be read on the way to the checkout counter. We didn't want to drop it and flee. So Lynn, who actually has the first story in there, his is scary, but it's not as like, you don't walk around, you know, walk out of there like brushing gore off your shirt.
Yeah.
So,
Brendan,
I
you're
had
too
concerns.
scary.
You know, I had concerns that like that sort of, I have been writing middle grade for a little bit, and one thing I've realized more than anything is that the kids can take it. As long as you stay away from the stayaways, and we don't need to go into what they are, but I think everyone kind of instinctually knows what they are. If you stay into the scare lane, they'll go with you. You know, you can do whatever you want within sort of, you know, those limits that are kind of defined themselves. My middle grade series is, you know, monsters and murders and, you know, all over them, but it's fine. You know, like kids will go with you. They're surprisingly smart. I tell you, the average middle grader today is like the high school senior from when I was growing up. I mean, with the internet, they are way ahead of us guys. They can handle it. The parents are the ones being like, oh, I wouldn't have read this in middle school. I'm like, well, would you have read it in high school? Because that's where your kid is right now with the evolution of like the acceleration of what you learn in society. And so ultimately I was like, wow, I'm just gonna let it fly. So I'm glad you liked it.
Jonathan, real fast, you and Alan Datlow are both really good at this too. Like you gave it like instructions kind of in terms of, you know, just a little bit like, hey, remember who this audience is, you know? And that's all it really took was that little bit in the email from you for me to be like, oh yeah, let's remember who this audience. But then I was aware of that the whole time. So guidance from you.
Well, thank you. That's a challenge for these things too, because I've been involved in, you know, I've written stories in about 115 anthologies so far. So, you know, I've done a bunch of these over the years. And one of the things about guidelines, the right writers will actually read the guidelines and will follow them. And the people who don't were not included in this book because I don't think hand-holding is that important. What I want to do is you know, give simple guidelines that does not intrude on the creative process, and that's you know that sometimes takes a little bit of thought, and usually the first draft of your letter to the writers then gets scaled back to about a paragraph. Because you know you have to trust the writer as well, you know. But at the same time, you need them to know what you want. I was involved in an Oz anthology at one point, Wizard of Oz anthology, fun book. But some of the stories, even from some of my friends who I dearly love, I love the actual stories, but some of them skewed to a much older audience. Whereas, you know, the kids who read the Oz books are about the same level as the kids who are reading scary stories. And to me, as a writer, as well as an editor, I want to serve the demographic of who is actually going to be sitting holding this book, not who's going to be buying it for the kid, who's going to be reading it.
And usually you can get away with almost any sort of acceleration. And I think these stories particularly, for this anthology, is an homage to the earlier work. You really wanted to ramp up the creep factor. I mean, that's really what you were going for. It was creepy. These stories were not jump scares. They were not the kind of like, you know, chased around. They were creepy things, the hook on the car and things like that. I mean, this was stuff later that gave you chills, but it wasn't sort of a in your face, you know, slammed at you kind of thing. And so that's really what I was going for. I was like, what would be just super creepy, you know? And I think that like, that's what the originals were. And that's what these, you know, this new group of stories are. And so that's why I felt it, you know, the work hit so close to the mark, which is, you know, obviously a credit to you, Jonathan, is they really did hit right in that same sort of creep zone, which is where, you know, the originals were. So it's definitely where we wanted to be.
I'm glad that I picked the right writers for it. So talking about this process, I know you each touched on very briefly what your story's about, and I don't want to, you know, I don't want to spoilers, but how long did it take you to land on that story? I mean, what was the process getting there? Margie, you want to start us off on that?
My story was about, like I said, it was inspired by my actual 6th grade slumber party and my bully. I had a really like a traumatic bully in grade school. And every day my parents would say, did you talk to her? Like they had imagined some confrontation I was going to have with this.
Like a Hallmark special moment?
Yeah, like this leader of the, you know, this bully girl. And every day I would just lie and say, yeah, or something. And I never did. And I, you know, this was my finally at my ripe age of now, that was me confronting my 6th grade nemesis. So I just basically imagined her as the victim of this scenario of 6th grade me kind of finally getting up the nerve to make her a corpse, a honorary corpse in Lives of Fellowship of the Board. And so I guess that's always the formula for me, is sort of a real emotional truth tied to a fantasy. So the scary thing in the book was my you know, my bully, and my truth was, you know, the person, my powerlessness being channeled into doing something. And I don't know, that unlocked really quickly, and then it seemed like a sort of right thing for me anyway.
Cool. Brendan?
Yeah, I mean, when I first got the call and it said yes, I sat down. I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to write. So I went back and I looked at the books, and I just remember, I think Cammie said it, and maybe some others chimed in as well, but they were timeless stories. And so that was my first point. Don't set it at a place where they're going to know what year it takes place. Mine ended up skewing towards like olden times, but like I was really like, just that's what we want to go, something that will work forever. And then I just sort of drew and immediately came to this memory, and I don't know where it came up, because when I was a kid, and this actually made its way into my college essays, but I was in Japan, and there was a old person selling trinkets from a cart, and I was 9 years old, and I did one of my original terrible things that I did in my life that haunted me. I wanted this little thing off it, so I snagged it. I stole. And I went up into the temple with this little Japanese, like it was made of clay, little figure, and I got away with it. And I was like, oh, this is great. And I went up. We went 2 hours later. We come back down out of the temple. The old man who was running the stall walks out and is pointing at me, and I almost died, because I'm like, I'm busted. I got caught. And instead he came over and he gave me another little figure. It was the companion with that, and he patted me on the head and he gave it to me as a gift.
Wow.
And I never felt more guilty about anything that ever happened to me, maybe in my entire life. Again, this made it into my college essays, and I wrote about it, and I remember in college writing about it, and it wasn't until that time when I was writing the essay that it occurred to me that I didn't get away with it, that of course he saw me steal. And then instead of busting me on it, he gave me like this life lesson that I never forgot for the rest of my life. I never stole anything again, because, and I was like, that kind of like deep wisdom was like mind blowing to me. And so I kind of, the story came from that, you know, I thought of that scenario, but it was supposed to be a horror story. So let's make it dark. Let's make it go the other way. And that's where the carved bear came from. It was exactly just like a little boy learning a lesson, but mine was a hopeful, you know, empowering one, and this one was not so much.
Cool. That's a great
story. I think stealing was one of the, like, I remember that. I stole a candy bar. Like, I remember that being like a part of the genre of that age of sort of crimes. And I was really scared about being kidnapped. I don't know if kids are like, I was about being hit by a car, kidnapped, and stealing things. That was like that was in my like constellation of fear.
So I stole something too. So we had in my monastery, we had these bookcases that opened like this and then closed. And I stole the giant padlocks off the front of them because I didn't want them to tell me when I could and couldn't read. And my mom picked up my backpack in kindergarten and was like, "What's in here?" and dumped it out. And there were 2 giant padlocks in my backpack. And she made me like take them back. And I remember she was like, "What would you possibly do with these? Why would you steal something so stupid?" And I was like, Mom, if you only knew. Not wise woman. These are so valuable. Now I can open all the books. But she didn't really, I think she just thought I thought it was like a cool like thing to play with. But I do think, again, like that's what's cool about these stories is there are universal things I think that happen to you around elementary, middle school age that like no matter what culture or where you're from, you just kind of like remember. And you all have that phase of like believing things like you say you don't because you're cool, but you really do. Like I would never have played Light as a Feather. Never. No.
That was scary.
So, Alethea, where'd your story come from? How long did it take you to get there?
It took me about a minute. And this is what the thought process started with Doctor Who, because I have this problem with overthinking everything. And even my books, even my short stories sometimes have casts of thousands because there's so many things going on. So I thought about Doctor Who because 2 of the scariest things were the dark and the silence. And they're so simple, so simple. And that's what I needed to start with. So then I was like, okay, what scared me when I was a kid? And I remember 2 things distinctly. One was a nightmare that I had, a recurring nightmare, my first recurring nightmare about a man breaking into our house. And it was an awful, awful nightmare. And it always ended with this guy just wanting to steal the silverware. That's all he ever wanted, every single time. But the whole drama of him trying to break in the house was awful. And I thought, well, that would make a really stupid, scary story. So the other thing that scared me when I was a kid was this painting that hung in my room when I was a little girl. And it was a square yellow painting. And I swear it was staring at me the whole time. And no matter where you were in the room, it stared at you. And I hated it. And I would hide under the bed to get away from the stare of this eyeball. But it was a peacock feather. It wasn't an eyeball. It was just a peacock feather. My parents would try to explain it to me, but finally they had to take it out of my room because I could not deal with this painting. And years later, I find out it was actually based on a friend who had painted it, based it on my aunt's eyeball when she was a little girl. So I was like, I can use this.
Oh yeah, my parents once put up pictures of my sisters in the downstairs bathroom, and they just stared at you. And like I ended up putting Post-it notes. I kept Post-it notes in there, and I put them over their faces when I was.
That's a therapy bill just waiting to happen, right there.
I know, right there, man. I was like, why are everybody staring at me in here? This is the worst idea ever.
Really?
Well, Brendan, if it's any consolation, my brother has photographs in his bathroom that are all people with their backs to you, so that you can be.
That's fantastic. Josh, how about you? How long did it take you to get to your story?
Well, it took me a minute. I also, was thinking obviously like what from my youth like totally chilled me. And the story that gets me every time, it's a little sad, the story, but it's that my grandma had Alzheimer's and was on the way out. And she was I was walking with her and my mom through a grocery store, and grandma had a doll that she thought was real, right? And I'm a kid, and grandma's talking to a doll as if it's alive. And my mom's like, Josh, don't worry. And I'm just like slack-jawed the whole time, like, what is going on? Like, and then I'm like, is it alive? And later that night, I was sleeping upstairs. I think my mom and grandma both were downstairs, and I had to go to the bathroom. I left the room, and the freaking doll was sitting alone in a chair in the room I had to pass to go to the bathroom. And I was like, it's just sitting there. And all day I'm like told it's alive all day. It's being talked to, and I'm alone with it upstairs. And I was like, I didn't go to the bathroom. I mean, I might have been in bed, but I didn't go to the room. I went back to bed. I'm like, no way. But okay, so my instinct was to do a version of that story, but it was just too sad or something. I'm like, I can't, this is not supposed to be about grandma losing her mind, not like that. And so from there, it was just a sort of a simple twist of, can we make grandma dangerous rather than sick? Because that concept, as a child, I mean, there was something witchy about grandma before that stuff that was so thrilling for me to like toy with for this one. And I want to say something real fast. I, in this sort of moment of trying to assert myself, I shared a room with my younger brother growing up, and my older brother had his own room. And I convinced my older brother to switch rooms. Hey, you sleep with Ryan. I'm gonna have my own room now. And he's like, all right, fine. But there was a poster of Michael Jackson in there that wherever I went in my older brother's room, the eyes were following me around, like you guys are describing. And I even stood up against the wall that it was on, and I'm like peering around. I'm like, he's still looking at me. He's still. And instead of taking that freaking poster down, I switched back. I'm like, yeah, no, Derek, I don't need. I kind of miss Ryan. You know, you can have your own.
Tammy, how long did it take you to get to your story?
Not that long. I wanted to write about something like that some people would find true and some people would not believe is true. And my family, my mom's family is from the South, and I'm very superstitious. And my great grandmother was very superstitious. And I think one of the things you deal with a lot is you have like generations like my great grandmother and her kind of cousins her age who all believed in certain things. And then like my mom's generation who thought it was all garbage and did not believe in some of that stuff. It was just like, oh, come on. Not my mom in particular. She's pretty superstitious, but a lot of the cousins were just like, oh, like another thing. And I wanted to write about the idea that like, you know, sometimes like you make fun of something or you don't believe in something, kind of the idea of a superstition or urban legend, and there is some truth to it. And bottle trees are a big thing in the South. You know, we believe that like you put the bottles on the you know, the small branches, you put them upside down. And then if there's like spirits or whatever nearby your house, they're attracted to, usually they only use colored glass. So they'd be attracted to the glass, and then they would like go inside the bottle and they would get stuck. So like that was how you would keep them out of your house, is you would have a big tree in your front yard. My mom has one, and you know, they would go in there instead. So in mine, I want to write about a daughter who inherits the house, but she doesn't believe in the bottle trees. So she decides she's going to cut it down. And, you know, like, is that really a good idea? Like, you know, yeah, of course, Brendan's like, no.
Yeah.
But, you know, but again, like so it's really about the little girl, the mom's, you know, the granddaughter who is like, why is she cutting down grandma's tree? You know, now, even though grandma died. And the mom's kind of like, I hate that tree. You know, they're ridiculous. I'm going to cut the tree down. And the little girl doesn't think it's a great idea, you know, and turns out she's the one who's right.
Cool. So just shifting gears a little bit to the readers of these things. Why do kids like to be scared? Because I know when I was a kid, I loved being scared, even though life was scary for me. I liked being scared. So why do kids read that stuff? I mean, why were they so excited about these books? And you know, what's wrong with kids?
I think kids read scary things purposely, because if you read something on purpose that you chose that you know is scary, it makes you feel in control of fear in general. So then when you go, you know, in your room or whatever, you have your overactive imagination and you're scared, you kind of feel like, you know, like the master of fear. Like you know, it's a way to control the things that frighten you.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty funny when kids at least with my kids anyway, when they miscalculate exactly their tolerance for something scary. Like I often will have them be like, I got this, is funny. And I'm like, buddy, you all right? I have a 10-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter. And my 8-year-old daughter is much more capable of handling scary things than my 10-year-old son. And so sometimes we're like, what is this? You good? Are you scared? He's like, no. And later you hear, like, as you're putting to bed, he's like, hey, remember that ninja in the movie? I'm terrified. Like, I can't sleep, you can't leave the room. And I'm just like, but no, that wasn't even a scary part, you know? So I just think it's funny that like they seek out scary things, but they really don't have a good grasp on where the edge is. So every now and again, they go way past it and you hear about it later. And then suddenly it's just like, yeah, I can't go in there anymore because, you know, random toys that they've had for years have suddenly be taken on a new scary function. So they're like, yeah, this has got to go. Like the tiger I had one at a fair when I was 12 has been in my son's room since he was born. And not last week, he's like, yeah, the eyes follow me. That thing's got to get out of here. And I was just like, literally grown up with this. I got this in Door County for you, you know, but nope, now it's too scary. And so I just think that's hilarious.
My nephew, who is at age 9, was pretty sophisticated and, you know, has watched every episode, literally every episode of The Simpsons, every episode of, I can't remember, but edited out, like we edited out the Borg. Like the Borg do not exist for him because that was so terrifying, and he was obsessed with Star Trek, but just like if a Borg episode came on, a mention of it, like he just would go shooting out of the room. So we all spent a lot of time like, they're not here, they don't exist, don't worry, they're gone. So I like that, the partial, you know, the like,
Well, it's self-censoring though. You know.
Yeah, there's at least 3 DVDs of movies in our collection that have a skip on them. Kids don't know, because I'm just like, they can watch like 92% of this, and then there's something too scary that I know is coming up. So usually, oh, what happened? Oh, the skip came up. You know, we'll never know what happened to that part. Nobody killed all of the young Padawans or anything like that. Don't worry about it. Keep moving.
Alethea?
I feel like the weirdo, and maybe I was just a weird kid. Maybe it was because I was Greek. I don't know. I did not like being scared. If I saw something that was scary, I would have nightmares later that would scare me forever, because I would always make things worse. Like, it was fine on television, but that night when I had a dream, it would be awful. And, you know, my dad reads coffee grinds and tells the future, and my mom used to read palms, and ghosts are real, and I would tell the dead people I didn't want them to talk to me. So that's the kind of place I grew up in, and I did not want to be scared. So in hindsight, my mom probably thought that was great, because she recognized that pretty early on I was just going to censor myself, and I was cool with that. So she always, yeah, we went to library book sales, and I was never, the books that I chose were never edited, and the books that my mother gave me, she never worried about giving me books. I guess she just figured I was a good judge of whatever I was the age for. But yeah, I was not ready for scary stuff seriously until college. I was almost 20.
I actually relate to that differently, because my family didn't read palms or coffee grounds, but they were Mormons, which is basically the same thing. No, I'm kidding. But they truly, like, I grew up in a community that believed in miracles, that God speaks directly to, you know, modern humans. And so my early terrors were about the devil, who, like, and that's who I'd see, not Bloody Mary in a dark mirror. If I looked out the window of my childhood bedroom, I was afraid I'd see the devil. And to me, he looked like the Joker on the old Batman TV series.
Wow.
I was terrified. And I think for me, it was being a child and not being able to sort out magical thinking and religious thinking, and all of these things were so confusing in my head that it was some of what you're saying, where it was all entirely plausible. So that was kind of a nuts twist for me.
Cool. Josh?
I guess, at least for me, I think I saw it as like a safe taboo. Meaning, like, I knew kids that stole and lied, like they lied to their parents, and maybe they even got in like fights. And to me, horror and being scared was like, I found a place where a good kid could hang out in a bad place.
Yeah.
And that was super thrilling to me. I was like, oh, wait a minute, like all those dudes in school that like the Misfits and stuff, like we can hang out in this room together. And that was a super thrill for me. It was almost like I remember being on the playground and someone telling me about The Exorcist, and they're like, it's rated X, stuff like that. And I'm like, what does that mean? I didn't even, there's like another rating higher, that worse than ours. Like, but those little conversations and those whispers and these books themselves, it felt like like a ticket. It would almost become through the years sort of like my own variety of religion, right? Because it was like almost like proof by way of imagination of another world, of a higher place, of another place. I just happened to prefer the lights dim in that place. And it was like a fun, yeah, I guess I would say my parents seemed like always a little like shocked by it, in the same way that, you know how a lot of people will say, oh, the horror writers are always the nicest people, you know, they say that. And then my parents were saying that to me at like age 9, like, you're such a good kid, why are you watching Firestarter right now, you know? But it seemed like a ticket where I was allowed, I didn't have to do anything wrong, and I could experience something so wrong, and it was awesome.
Yeah. You know,
I think Exorcist is the scariest movie ever made.
Same.
Like, we must be the same age, like, but
Yeah.
I'm from DC where the stairs are. And like Alethea, like, I also know ghosts are real and all the bad stuff. And I remember, like, I write horror, you know, my Legion series is full of haunted places. And that's actually how I met Jonathan. I was like, Jonathan was like one of the authors that I loved like more than anything. And I got to be on this panel with him. And I was telling him how I loved him so much and how, you know, I'd written a horror novel. He's like, you should let me read it. And I was like, no, I was going to send it to you for a blurb, but I'm too like nervous and embarrassed. And he was like, send it to me. I'm about to get on a plane. I have nothing to do. And I sent it to him and he ended up liking it. But the weird thing was, I remember somebody was like, oh, well, you know, we could go stay in like a haunted house, you know, for like a retreat. And I was like, what? Absolutely not. And they were like, well, it'd be so fun. You know, you love haunted places. I was like, no, I don't like haunted places. I write about haunted places, but that's not the same. I don't want to sleep in a haunted place. And I was like, Margie, I was very worried about like evil spirits and the devil and like getting an old doll that like the Warrens hadn't found yet and hidden away that had like something in it. And I just remember that.
We went on book tour and I still remember changing rooms, like it being midnight in Austin, Texas.
Texas.
Yeah, I can't sleep in that room.
So I can't sleep in a place that has 13 on it, right? So we get to the hotel and Margie was like, we go up and she's like, you should change your room now. It's late. You don't want to do it later. And I was like, no, I'm not going to change my room. I'm going to stay in this room.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It was like 2:13 or something. So I go in and I shoot like a video of myself, how I'm staying in the room to put on like Facebook or something. And then I sit in the room and I take some of my clothes out and I was like, hell no, I'm not staying in this room. So I go downstairs and I tell the guy, you know, I need a different room. And he was like, why, what's wrong with your room? And I was like, it's 2:13. And he was like, okay. And I was like, you know, this is like the fake South, but we're kind of in the South, you know, it's like 13. And he was like, I don't understand. And I was like, I don't want to sleep in a room with 13 on it. So then he was like, really? And I'm like, yes, really. So then he said, well, like, is it 1 and 3? And I was like, no, it's not 1 and 3, but it can't be like 13. The 1 and 3 cannot be next to each other in that order. So I remember he was on the computer and he's like, okay, so I guess like 413 is out. I was like, yeah, you got it, dude. Like, just find one that doesn't have 13. And the guy that helped me move my luggage, like, looked at me like I was totally like, I needed more than a new room.
Yeah. Well, because it's like midnight, but we knew because by then we've been.
I know, but I was tired and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep in the 13 room.
Respect. I've always respected for you. It goes all the way to your core.
True.
You know, it's funny. I come from a slightly different background in that my grandmother was pretty much the old lady version of Luna Lovegood. She believed in everything. She was born on Halloween. She only bought animals or raised animals that were born on Halloween. Gave me my first puppy who was born on Halloween. I loved her. So for me as a kid, the spooky stuff was safer than the real world because, you know, I grew up in a pretty abusive home and, you know, very violent neighborhood. And all of that was much scarier to me than vampires, werewolves, and monsters because, I mean, they would kill some people. But in my neighborhood, you know, we had SWAT teams raiding my friends' houses and, you know, but my grandmother's place was all about the creepy. She taught me how to read tarot cards at age 10 and I loved it to pieces. And I've dedicated a couple of my creepier books to her because I think she'd really appreciate it. She would definitely love this book. She did a lot of what Alvin Schwartz did, because Schwartz, when he was writing his books, he would take folklore and pop culture, urban legends, and retell them in his own voice for a certain target audience. And my grandmother did the same thing to me. She would tell me stories that I would later realize were, The Werewolf of Paris by Guy Endor, or Jekyll and Hyde. She would just make it about two kids down the block, but it would be the same story. And I loved the scary part of it. So I'm going to wrap with two quick questions. One, if you were to recommend another book, anybody's book, published whenever, that if somebody's going to come into a bookstore or library and buy this, what are the books should they walk out with? What other scary books should they walk out with?
I would say Brendan and Allie's book, The Dark Deep, because it's super creepy. It's it's exactly the same perfect age. And it's got if you would like this collection, that's a high creep factor.
Cool.
That's very nice of you. I actually immediately was thinking of one of our colleagues as well. Steph Perkins, There's Someone Inside the House.
Yeah.
Maybe skews a little bit older, but I actually read it and I was so inspired by what she wrote. I texted her immediately because she had managed to do something on the page that I thought could only be done cinematically. She used a device that would move your eyes around the scene and give you the impression of knowing things that the characters didn't know, but without actually visualizing it. Like, in horror films, you see the guy walk behind in the background and it scared you to death. I always thought that was the scariest part of the Friday the 13th movies, when they're just washing the dishes and then you see Jason just walk by in the background in the woods. Nowhere, that always terrified me. Like, that was the scariest part of the whole film. And so to get that on the page where she was using objects and words to bring you around where the character wasn't realizing what was happening, but you absolutely were. And you're like, yo, pay attention. I thought she just did a great job. So all the way through, it's a horror book, but it's just fantastic.
Cool. Alethea?
I'm trying to remember pretty much anything that had dolls in a dollhouse. There are a few of them. The Castle in the Attic, I think, is one of them. Those were creepy to me. And now I'm creep light. So they were not super creepy at all. Or anything Lois Duncan. I loved her.
Oh, yes.
If they're older. I mean, I was older when I read that. Maybe middle schoolers can totally read it now and be just fine. But yeah, I loved all the Lois Duncan stuff. Stranger with My Face. Oh,
nice.
Yeah, Lois Duncan is so good. I've only read like 2 by her. Was she prolific? She have a bunch?
I don't know how many, but there were a lot.
I read this
a lot
recently. Wait Till Helen Comes.
Yeah, I think I read that too.
And I don't know if this is like banned now or something, but this one kind of freaked me out, man. And then I also just read for the first time A House with a Clock in Its Walls. And I found out that dude is from Michigan as well. I never knew this. Where he lived is not far from where I'm sitting right now. And they visit the house that he based those books on. And I'm a horror author. I've been here my whole life and I've never known this. I read that book. I Wikipedia'd him. I'm like, man, this guy's really good. I'm gonna look this dude up. I'm like, what do you mean Michigan? Wait, what do you mean up the street? So I'm gonna go check that out. But I feel like those are good companions for scary stories.
Cool. Margie?
I was trying to think about that. It's an old collection that's not horror per se, but it's in the bizarre category by Joan Aiken called Necklace of Raindrops. That stayed with me my whole life. That's just sort of like middle grade Borges in a certain way, sort of like twisted tales. And aside from that, I think sort of the scary doll, like Josh, the scary doll genre was very scary to me. So like the Holly Black's Doll Bones, or what's the other classic doll? There's like there's a whole category there that I think
it must be miniature things, because I'm dolls have never been really my things, but like you take a little kid and you make them dirty and then they stare at you. And I'm terrified. Like, it's the scariest thing in the world. Like, Children of the Corn ruined me. I could not handle that. Like, dirty little kids staring at you is the most terrifying thing on the planet. If I'm like at a gas station in a small town, there's just some kid in like overalls, it's just like, I'm out. I mean, I'm gone because that you're gonna die within 10 minutes of that. Like somehow, maybe not the kid, but you're not getting out of there unless you leave now. Like so dolls, little kids, but they have to be also, I think they have to be dirty. Like it's just like, why are you dirty? Something bad's happening. Like,
what I realized was scary in your book, Brendan, is also like the twist. And I think for some reason, everyone loves, the twist they don't see coming. But I think for kids, because the world is so sort of incomprehensible in a certain way, I think just like magic could be real or horror could be real, the twist can, is equally, they don't see it coming. So I think there's something so unnerving about the end twist. So like, I remember being little and Twilight Zone, to serve mankind, it's a cookbook. Like it's those like, it's those like child reveals of like the way worse thing, that's lying right under the surface that really have stayed with me. Although the scariest thing for me was Jaws, which I never saw, and to this day have never seen.
I've seen it.
I was so scared of, I couldn't dangle my feet down off the couch.
It's a fun movie. Yeah.
Because it was like the water off the dock.
Yeah,
Jonathan, or actually Josh would probably know this too. What's that old movie in the 70s, in the ad? It was a creepy baby carriage and like a funky hand came out of it.
It's Alive.
Oh, yeah.
That's it.
Right.
I was so scared of that commercial as a child. Like my parents wouldn't leave the television on if I was like, no one was in the room, because if it came on, you had to run in front of the TV and like physically get in front of it.
Yeah, it's a trilogy of movies, by the way. The series didn't age well. The one I recommend for kids if they're going to get this was a book given to me just around the time of my 13th birthday by Ray Bradbury. It was a Christmas gift, and it was Something Wicked This Way Comes. And I read that every Halloween week, and I have since I was a kid. I mean, Halloween Tree is great too, which is another one of his books, but there's something about the magic of that, because it's, two friends, one makes a good decision, one makes a bad decision. And I was never sure as a kid which way I would have gone. And I kind of think I would have made the wrong decision as a kid. But that book holds up really, really well, even though it's, 1950s small town, and I was a kid I grew up in the 60s, but I'm from, big city Philadelphia. So, all right. So as we wrap here, tell people, who are watching this, where they can find you. Margie, you want to give us a start?
Margaret _Stohl on Instagram, mstohl on Twitter, mstohl.com. My most recent book was Joe and Laurie, an alt Little Women retelling, and I'm writing Spider-Man Noir that's wrapping up in a month or so for Marvel.
That's outstanding. Brendan?
I'm at Brendan Reichs everywhere. I happen to have a unique name, which was delightful when I could get it. So that's pretty much anywhere you want to look for me on all of your platforms. Find me out there. But I do have the third in my sort of creepy middle grade series, The Torchbearers. It's the third in the Dark Deep series that Ali Condi and I wrote. It comes out now, I believe it's October 27th, which would be fun because we've been aiming them around Halloween. They are actually scary books. Like they are supposed to be creepy, scary, middle grade, maybe higher middle grade, because there's some scary things in there, but they're funny. That comes out then, so hopefully you guys check it out. And I'd say we can't do the whole thing without recommending like to read like either R.L. Stine or Christopher Pike books if you were looking for it. I was sitting there, I'm like, what did I actually read? I said all these stuff, and I didn't mention the stuff that I mainlined, that I went through like one after the other after the other.
Love R.L. Stine.
So those are the stuff that really got me going. That's it.
Alethea.
Like Brendan, I have a nice unique name, so I'm at aletheakontis.com or any of the social medias. Lately, I've been on Instagram a lot. That's just where I ended up this year. So chances are you're more likely to find me on Instagram than anywhere else these days. I did not have a book come out this year, and so because of that, I'm in about 12 anthologies. So yeah, I'm everywhere.
Including?
Josh.
That's Josh Malerman on all the platforms. I guess I also have a unique name. And then my website used to be kind of boring, but just recently it got a lot more exciting because I serialized a novel live I wrote it, checked it, posted it like the next day, each chapter by chapter, which, man, I'll tell you guys, that was a bizarre experience. Once you start to have people reading along and then you're like, uh-oh, this better be good. This better go somewhere good. But I did do it, and I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to rewrite it. I'm going to leave it as it is, like a live album, and it's on the website for free. There's no number of views on it or likes or reviews. It's just sitting there to be read for free. So the website, joshmalerman.com, has got more excited recently.
That's, by the way, how it feels to write comics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
Like, that's not where I was going.
Cami?
So I'm also just my name, CamiGarcia.com, and Cami Garcia at all the places. And I have Teen Titans Beast Boy coming out, which you do not have to have read Raven. It's a standalone. It's an origin story. And then I am also in the midst of writing that is not for kids, it's adults. I'm writing an adult horror series for DC. It's called Joker Harley Criminal Sanity, which is a procedural of the Joker as a serial killer and Harley as a profiler who's hunting him. And that's super fun to write. But also, like Josh said, you know, like if you make a mistake or whatever, it's like, well, tough luck. And I am in the midst of that. And then I actually have a free thing on my site. I just remembered, only because Josh said it, because I'm so bad at promoting anything. But if you subscribe to my newsletter, which, by the way, there's only one, I've only written one newsletter, but you get a free short story that's called Red Run, which is a ghost story. And it's the first short story I wrote. I like that story too, just because it was like it was my first time I wrote a short story, and it's a fun, creepy, like, you know, kind of riff on the old hitchhiker, you know, dark road kind of thing.
Cool. And I'm Jonathan Maberry. Everywhere, just spell my last name right. It's M-A-B, not M-A-Y-B. And I really hope you guys check out, you know, Don't Turn Out the Lights. It's a fun, deeply weird, very entertaining book with also some incredibly cool illustrations by Iris Compiet, a woman from the Netherlands, an artist from the Netherlands who did a great job. You know, it's impossible to, you know, to beat Stephen Gamel, but she does one heck of a job, and each story has its original piece of art. So it's a lot of fun. And the book comes out in hardcover, ebook, and audio September 1st. So thanks to my wonderful panelists. You guys are great and fascinating. And wish we were all sitting around somewhere having a meal without masks. Yeah. Hopefully, you know, one of these days.
Drinks.
But everybody stay safe, and stay inside and read a scary book. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.